Well, you know, I mean, the crazy white hair and the vest full of buttons and all the sayings, and of course everyone remembers him yelling out things in the middle of their show.
A huge coat, like he's homeless or something, and he's got like tons of stuff underneath it.
He was dressed in his customary long coat, looking quite disheveled, and having a shopping bag, one on each arm.
He would carry things around for a long, long time, like food and things, for days.
As long as I could remember, he had gray hair, but then he stopped cutting it and it got longer and longer. He got beard got longer, and he got shaggier, and he wore those little girls' glasses that only came to here. The stems of the glasses didn't go around his ears. They were like little girls' glasses. Yeah. You don't remember that?
I do remember.
Oh, yeah.
You do.
Well, it was like this anticipation when you do a show and Harold was there. Harold was there. No, what's going to happen? Like we'd have bets of when he's going to yell out, like the quietest moment.
No, but the most important line sometimes. He'd hear something, he'd make a comment, and he wasn't even aware that the next line is actually what everyone should be listening to. But, you know, so there it was.
We're talking about a phenomenon of the theater scene in the early 80s, whose name was Harold. Now, Harold showed up at every play,
every single small theater piece, in every single public rehearsal, in the worst spaces, often for the worst shows. Here was this man.
Well, I just remember seeing him around all the time and you know, thinking he was kind of a fascinating entity.
You know, I'm gonna say, I feel, I was there. I was one of those people who was always a little bit mixed, had mixed feelings about seeing Harold in the lineup.
The play started, and he started heckling it. And I, being fresh out of theater school, had no idea who this man was or what was the problem, but I was horrified because I just got out of theater school, and that was the worst thing that could happen. So I grabbed his hand, and I said, Harold, you cannot do that. Please don't do that. And he kept heckling the play, and I was frozen with fear. I thought, I can't. I was embarrassed for him, with him, for myself. I didn't know what to do.
Would you be my Valentine?
Junior, for you, I'd change my sex.
The ship sails at midnight.
There she is, the worst waitress in the world. Woohoo!
Vive la France!
Kiss him! Kiss him!
One of the very, very first shows I ever directed years and years ago was a Fringe show about child sexual abuse. And Harold was trying to have a dialogue with him on his monologue. It's just awful.
And I just thought.
And I said to him, afterwards, when we left and walked home back up towards Poppers, I said, Harold, please, I can't take you to the theater or go with you to the theater and accompany you if you're going to heckle all the players. It's so difficult when you're up there. He said, don't tell me about heckling.
And Harold, during one very serious part with great brevity, said to in a very loud voice, "You're all a bunch of terrible actors." And the audience clapped. And he was right. And then we all started laughing.
It would rattle their cage, and the whole show would then kind of careen off into a sort of other area.
You're reminded of those early Shakespearean days of theater when it was like a party going on.
He said, I went and saw a theater show once, and I smelt smoke. He said, and I looked over and the toaster was on fire. He said, they're not listening to me.
Harold would, of course, monologue. He didn't really converse. He would talk about politics and Marxism.
It was unpredictable. Anything could happen when he was in the house. And
he said, I told you the toaster's on fire. Nothing. He said, they just went on and on and on. He said, I finally said, once the place started to catch on fire, I told you the toaster was on fire. He said, that actor stood there babbling on about his monologue, didn't even flinch until, of course, the curtain went up. And that's when I realized that's why Harold heckles and feels completely entitled to.
Harold, when he was staying with us, he told us about how when he was a kid, he'd hand out programs at the Royal Alex. Wow. I think he was like one of the little ushers or something like that.
Harold learned how to speak out loud in the theater, like honestly, from his mother.
Because his mother was doing that kind of work as well.
What's she saying? What's she talking about? And she was yelling really loudly at Harold. And so Harold started yelling back at her in the midst of this beautiful, quiet, very, I don't know, it's very lovely.
And so Harold came to the show, once, and then he came again, and then he came again. And I guess by the third time, he would sit in the audience, and just before the watermelon would come out, he would yell, "Here comes the watermelon!" And everybody, of course, would think he was nuts until the watermelon actually did roll on stage, and then he was a prophet and brilliant, and they would clap.
He came to a house party where I was with 2 bags of groceries.
Nice. I saw Harold on a bus once, and he heckled the bus driver.
I worked in Stratford for a couple of years, and he would show up in town with all his bags, and you'd find him wandering down the main street, and he'd say, you know, I'd really like to get some tickets to a show, and you know, I wonder how I could do that. It's like, you know, go to the box office, and you know, you figured he didn't have any money, and invariably he would go to the box office, and he would charm one of these women in the box office and get comps for shows at Stratford.
Again, it was at Stratford. It was an opening night, and Harold was there, and true to form, he was shouting back at the actors and saying things like "Look out!" And the suits in front kept, you know, turning around and giving him the evil eye, and at one point they couldn't take it anymore and turned around and told him in no uncertain terms to shut up, and he stood out of his chair with his finger in the air and he said, "I only take orders from Caesar!"
So he would tell these stories about actors that he'd seen in his youth that were just romantic and magnificent, and you just thought, what a lost chapter in our theatrical history, and he's probably one of the few people who could describe it, you know, who was there.
When he really liked the show, he would also say things, and once during the ending of a show when I felt we really reached what we were striving for, Harold said in a very loud voice, "How sweet it is."
I mean, he loved the theater. Greg tells a story about he was doing some stupid kids show down at the CNE at one of the, you know, sort of low points of his career, and Harold was there every single day. I mean, you know, the bleachers would be empty, and Harold would be sitting there while they played Dancing Vegetables or whatever it was.
I was the cow, and he danced with the cow. He was like, "Yeah, I think you like the black and white cow."
We loved him because he always came to every one of our shows.
He came to everything we did.
Yes, from what I remember, he came to every performance.
He was always like, it is theater lore that at a Nightwood show, there was an actor on stage.
And it's got this thing going on, and she's talking about
racism, boom, boom, ageism, boom, boom, weightism, boom, boom. And Harold stood up and screamed out, "Rheumatism! Rheumatism!"
Forget about that, what about rheumatism?
And it was like one of the greatest things I'd ever seen in theater.
I saw him get thrown out of the Tarragon.
Yeah, we had a vote at White Church Blue Eyes and we wouldn't let him come to the show.
But unfortunately, I can't let you in for these reasons, and his face just dropped.
Just the sight of Harold packing up all his bags and being escorted out of the Spring Arts Fair was horrible.
The reality is he was one of the most supportive, compassionate, and intelligent people that the small theater community has ever seen. He was knowledgeable, he was present, he was respectful of art and artists.
There's no one else who had both his passion and his capacity for participation without destroying the event that he was participating in. And he did it really, really well.
Harold was a part of our scene. He was a big part of our scene.
The real memory of Harold is imprinted in the bones of every performer who got shook.
I appreciated the fact that he did exactly what he wanted to do, politically and artistically and socially, and believed in something and followed through on it.
One show, I just opened my heart to him because I really didn't like it much, but I wasn't going to say anything. And Harold just yelled out at one point, "What a load of shit!" And I just loved him forever after.
And I walked on stage for like my entrance into the scene or whatever, and Harold yelled, "King!" And I thought, oh, I've arrived. I'm significant now. Harold knows who I am. And that's my Harold story.